She has been called the Mother of Thanksgiving. Now, who was she, and why was she so hot and bothered about making Thanksgiving a legal national holy day? Well, dear one, it is time for us to engage our third-person unemotional self as we investigate the patroness saint of Thanksgiving, Saran J. Hale. Are you ready? Well, let's get to it. Sarah Josepha Buell was born in 1788 in Newport, New Hampshire, 168 years after the Separatists landed in Plymouth and 158 years after the Puritans sailed into Massachusetts Bay. Sarah's parents were progressive advocates of higher education, especially for women. Sarah was educated by her parents, brother, and, like Abraham Lincoln, she even tutored herself. This is an important cultural anomaly because Puritanism, like Pharisaism, specialized in the undercover victimization of women, specifically undereducated landholding widows. Unlike Massachusetts, New Hampshire was settled mostly by fishermen and was not a religious colony per se, but the founder of New Hampshire Colony, David Thompson, was friendly with the Separatists of Plymouth Colony. Even so, Massachusetts Bay Puritans were still able to work their greedy magic and were able to foment the takeover of David Thompson's land holdings and produce at least a couple of lesser-known witch hunts in 1630 and 1656. Before the infamous moral failure that happened in Salem in 1692 and 3. Those Puritans, such tyrannical busybodies. At any rate, Sarah J. Buell met lawyer David Hale at the Rising Sun Tavern that her father had built in 1811, and on October 23, 1813, they were wed at the same tavern. They had 5 children, but she was widowed after only 9 years of marriage. With the financial support she received from her late husband's Freemason lodge, Sarah published a collection of her poems titled The Genius of Oblivion, and 4 years later she published her first novel titled Northwood. She was the author of the poem Mary Had a Little Lamb, and in 1837 she became the editor of a highly influential women's magazine, Godey's Lady's Book. So yeah, a pretty amazing lady. But at the same time, what I read kind of made me sad too. If she wasn't a oneness believer, then it's like I said in my last video. According to Jesus, if you don't know who God or Jesus Christ is, then you won't obtain salvation. And it's also, like Jesus said, what good is it to gain the whole world, yet lose your own soul? Now, dear one, this was the life and times that Sarah Hale hailed from. The Puritans were not as pure as they thought themselves to be. In fact, many Puritans, even ministers, were alchemists. Sir Isaac Newton is said to have been a Freemason, but there is no doubt of his alchemical studies. Alchemy was and is a mixture of scientific chemistry and pagan beliefs. Not to mention that if you've ever studied Freemasonry, then you'll understand why that is problematic concerning the true Christian faith. If you haven't studied Freemasonry, the all-seeing eye of providence of this secretive fraternal order isn't the God of the Bible. Not even close. Now, here are some quotes from Sarah Hale regarding her intent and design for Thanksgiving, so you can decide for yourself what her motivation was in lobbying to make it a legal national holiday. I found these quotes on the website www.congregationsofgod.org. Quote, "Consecrate the last Thursday in the month." Sarah J. Hale, Godey's Lady's Book, 1861. Quote, "The last Thursday in November, let it be consecrated." Sarah J. Hale, Godey's Lady's Book, 1865. "A holy day is added to our days of rest from worldly labors. A third joyful anniversary is sealed for the American Republic." End quote. Godey's Lady's Book, 1865. I don't know about you, but it sounds like she was motivated by religion to me. And why Thursday? Well, it turns out that the Yankee Calvinists had a custom of Sabbath keeping. And back in the day, prepping for and celebrating Thanksgiving was quite the laborious task and was darn near frivolous. So, its legal observation could only be made possible by having it on Thursday. Whew! Thank God for those loopholes. And now it's time for an interesting side note. Thursday is actually a corruption of Thor's Day, and Thor is the Norse god of thunder and lightning, just like Jupiter is the Roman god of thunder and lightning. And of course, Jupiter's Greek counterpart is Zeus, who we recently learned is associated with the cornucopia, which is, of course, Thanksgiving's most iconic pagan harvest symbol. Coincidence? Maybe. That is, if you believe in coincidences, of course. Now here is where Sarah shows her lack of biblical knowledge when she confuses Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks held in the summer, with the Feast of Trumpets that is held in the fall, which is the feast that is being celebrated in the Nehemiah passage that she is quoting from. Honest mistake? Maybe. She also shows her hand as being a syncretist by waylaying the fears of God-fearing people who know better than to mess with God's holy days by using her misinterpreted scripture and bad human reasoning. Now, this quote is sourced from the Congregations of God website. Quote, "Then he said to them, Go your way, eat the fat, and drink the sweet, and send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto our God. Neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10. Now, such was the order given to the people of Israel for the celebration of their national and religious festival, the Feast of Weeks. We learned from this that a day of yearly rejoicing and giving of gifts was not only sanctioned but enjoined by divine authority on God's chosen people. Such yearly festival is not positively enjoined on Christians, but that it is both expedient and beneficial may be safely urged when we find that the practice was approved by our God and Father in heaven. Our day of Thanksgiving represents, in many striking coincidences, the Jewish Feast of Weeks. Only make our day national, and we should then represent the union of joy that was the grand proof of divine blessing. Saran J. Hale, Godey's Lady's Book, 1857. So, what do you think, dear one? Was she intent on replacing God's feast with an American holy day called Thanksgiving? Well, let's read a few more quotes to see if that is so. Quote, "We will have a glorious time at Thanksgiving. All our family will then be gathered together, like the Jews at the Feast of Tabernacles." The Merchant Farmer, Godey's Lady's Book, 1839. Quote, "Well did that patriot divine, Reverend Charles Wadsworth, exclaim in his last Thanksgiving sermon, 'Thanks be unto God for this American Pentecost. Never before did so many sister states keep lovingly together this feast of harvest. It is the gathering of the one great household with offerings of praise to the one common temple, the central Salem of peace, the love of God." Sarah Hale, Godey's Lady's Book, 1860. Quote, "These were the Passover, the Feast of Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Then he commanded them to keep annually a holy day called the Day of Atonement. All these days and feasts which we have named were ordained and kept by the express command of God, from which we draw our warrant to have and to hold days of thanksgiving." Bishop Campbell, The Christian Recorder, 1870. Quote, "An annual religious festival observed in the United States, particular in New England, suggested by the Hebrew Feast of Tabernacles, or Feasts of Ingathering at the end of the year." The Christian Recorder, January 17th, 1889. Well, there you have it. Religious license at its worst. Such boldness on Sarah's and Bishop Campbell's part. At least the professional clergy got the right feast, tabernacles, instead of the Feast of Weeks. Sarah Hale saw the need to make Thanksgiving a mandated national holy day dedicated to the God of the Bible for all Americans to celebrate, albeit according to the New England standard of family life and piety. Amazingly, I couldn't find any official religious affiliation for Sarah Hale. She must have held some sort of Puritan-based faith, since that particular Protestant faith dominated her part of the country, New England. Was she a Congregationalist, which was a Puritan Baptist Quaker hybrid? I'm pretty sure she wasn't a oneness believer. Whatever her faith, she never referred to the despised separatists or pilgrims as being the founders of Thanksgiving. Again, even though the Puritans thought themselves to be pure in their Christianity, history has shown quite the opposite. They weren't good or even true biblical Christians in so many ways. Concerning holy days, the ancient English pagan harvest feast, Lunacid, was renamed Harvest Home. Here is another quote that shows us two things. First, Sarah's spiritual ignorance by again thinking that Pentecost or the Feast of Weeks is a fall feast. Secondly, her syncretism by linking it with Harvest Home is here called Harvest Festival. Quote, "Can we not then, following the appointment of Jehovah in the Feast of Weeks or Harvest Festival, establish our yearly Thanksgiving as a permanent American national festival?" Sarah Hale, Godey's Ladies Book, 1863. No, Sarah, no, we can't. Because Pentecost is not the same as Harvest Festival. And we are not on equal ground with Jehovah to be setting our own terms of worship. Those who participate in religious syncretism absolutely need some sort of godly anchor to moor to in order to safely harbor their idolatry in their well-intended, albeit wayward heart. We see this kind of behavior over and over in the Old Testament, and it never turns out well. But people keep trying that insanity. So, as what happens with all things that have pagan roots, what do we have today? Do we have a day of solemn prayer and fasting directed at the one and true God of the Bible, Jehovah, like the New England Calvinists hypocritically modeled? No. We have a day of gluttony, wine bibbing, and the worship of the blood sport football, and even a parade dedicated to greed or merchandising. I'm sure Sarah would be so pleased with her legacy, huh? Methinks not. The Catholic Church's pagan roots have sought to assimilate any and all pagan celebrations from humanity's soil and then assimilate them by disguising them with Christian phraseology, and Thanksgiving is no different. Remember the Wampanoag people? They would absolutely fit in with the modern celebration of Thanksgiving since they did all of these Thanksgiving festivities, including playing some sort of sport. Well, except for the sport of shopping until you drop. Here's another quote highlighting Mrs. Hale's long-standing efforts of making Thanksgiving a national holy day. Now, this quote is taken from the website HistoryNet, written by David Kindy on December 2019. His article, "The Pilgrim Story is Mostly Stuffing." I really like that. All right, quote, "Hale petitioned 4 presidents to make a national holy day of Thanksgiving without success. In August 1863, however, following the epical Civil War battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, President Abraham Lincoln called for a national Thanksgiving. Hale wrote to the White House urging the president to make, quote, the day of our annual Thanksgiving a national and fixed Union festival, end quote. That October, Lincoln ordered an annual observance to commence on November 26th and thereafter take place on the final and usually the fourth Thursday of every November. Neither Hale's letter nor Lincoln's proclamation mentions the Pilgrims. Well, who is the "our" in her statement? I will be willing to wager a turkey sandwich that she didn't mean the separatist Pilgrims. Now, according to colonial historian Anne Marie Plain, Thanksgiving is an invented tradition, not an unbroken one. Now, here is a quote from Ms. Plain regarding Mrs. Hale's push to make Thanksgiving a national holy day by law. It's a political thing for her, and in studying it, the thing I want my students to learn is that frequently what you see in a holiday tradition is something that purports to be historical, but is actually a creation for new purposes. It's a deployment of history and historical narratives for some new reason. It's not fake, but it is packaged. Political and packaged indeed. Well spoken, Miss Plain. Even so, did Sarah fully understand the spiritual ramifications of her intent to force the syncretic Puritan holy day of Thanksgiving onto the entire nation of the United States, a country that was founded on the premise of not having a national religion, like Calvinism? Maybe, but methinks not. She didn't even know that Harvest Festival was of pagan origin, or maybe she thought, like the Israelites of old, that you can do what is right in your own eyes in the worship of God as long as you're well-intended and He'll be okay with it. This is simply not the case, dear one. God sets the terms of our worship of Him, not us. The scripture makes this truth very clear to those of us who can and do see it. But that fact does not keep the ignorant religious people from trying to make covenants with God as if they are on equal ground with Him or equal terms with Him. As Paul rhetorically stated in 1 Corinthians 10:22, are we stronger than He? Of course, referencing God's might in relation to cutting a suzerainty type covenant. But that's a topic for another day. Now, taking on the syncretistic attitude of mixing the pagan with the godly, with the assumption that improving on the pagan holy days by imputing a godly sense of righteousness on them is a recipe for disaster. Problems always arise when one or the other side of the syncretism gap demands exclusivity, which is what will happen always. And if the root of the holy day is pagan, guess which side will eventually win? Yep, the pagan side. Holy days of God and Satan are good examples of how some things just don't mix well, kind of like iron and clay. And let's not forget how much God hates syncretism for this very reason. Alas, Mrs. Hale didn't live to see her dream of consecrating the last Thursday in November as Thanksgiving Day by law. That sort of happened in 1942 after FDR's supposed Hitleresque power grab to have America's sacred Turkey Day, or Franksgiving as it was lampooned, when he moved Thanksgiving to the third Thursday of November the year before. Why? To boost Christmas sales, of course, at the behest of the greedy retailers, which I find very ironic, since Mr. Roosevelt was a descendant of the Plymouth colonist Philippe Delanoë, or Philip Delano in Americanese. I guess the American people were more sentimental back then and weren't as greedy as the retailers had hoped they were, which is actually a nice surprise, unlike today. For example, Robert Urbash of Iowa State's Department of Political Science found that, quote, an early Thanksgiving appears to serve as an economic stimulus in the labor market, end quote. Can you see the insanity of trying to make paganism godly? The law to fix the date of Thanksgiving was a joint resolution, i.e. compromise, and now Thanksgiving is to be forever the fourth Thursday and not the last Thursday in November. Sorry, Sarah, but you can't always get exactly what you want when you are playing the syncretism game with the big boys in Washington. The secured date now falls anywhere between the 22nd and 28th of November. Whew, that was a close call. Yay for compromise, greed, and syncretism, said no real Christian ever. Yes, dear one, thanks to Sarah Hale, the patroness saint of Thanksgiving, it is now a legal national holy day infused with Puritan America's moral values and mixed with the pagan elements of the ancient English celebration of Harvest Festival. Well, dear one, what say you? Do you still think that Thanksgiving is the pure Christian holy day that the Christian clergy and the patroness saint of Thanksgiving, Sarah Hale, make it out to be? Or is it like all the other worldly holy days that are hiding its pagan roots under the seemingly godly rhetoric and decorations that were slapped onto it in the hopes that it would stick? Like the separatists before me, I'll let you decide for yourself. As for me and my house, we have decided to give thanks unto our God whenever we want to, sans the legacy of gluttony, greed, and blood sport that Thanksgiving's pagan roots will always bring to the table. And that's a wrap for this Fall Holy Day series. And I hope to see you next week, dear one, as I continue on in my mission to see if what they, the Christian clergy, say about Christmas is so. Maybe. I've already done 3 videos on Christmas, so we'll see. Until then, dear one, bye-bye for now. My first belch. I'm doing good. When you were talking in third person, you're unemotional. You know? Kind of like I really like to cry right now. Cut the noisy car. I need a studio.